Hey friends, before we hop into this episode of the Lead with People, Not at Them series on the Speak with People podcast, have you heard about the Leadership Collective? This is an absolutely free ebook that's available to you at speakwithpeople.com/leadwithpeople. This is a leadership companion guide that's just filled with 37 different leadership principles from leaders from around the country who poured out their insights and their wisdom to help all of us grow and become authentic and healthy leaders. Make sure that you go and download the Leadership Collective right now at speakwithpeople.com/leadwithpeople. And don't just stop there. Send that link to a friend so they can explore and grow in their leadership as well. Thanks. Now for this week's episode of the Speak with People podcast. Well, welcome to the Speak with People podcast. My name is Jason Raitz. I'm excited that you are joining us today. At Speak with People, we believe that healthy communication is oxygen for your relationships and your leadership. So whether you communicate one-on-one, to a team, from a stage, or from a screen, we really hope this time today encourages you, inspires you, challenges you to breathe life into your world with your communication. Before we hop into today's episode, I just wanted to make sure you knew about our coaching programs here at Speak with People. One of the absolute best ways you can invest in your leadership is to invest in growing your communication skills. So again, whether you communicate one-on-one or from a stage, you're doing presentations, we would love to come alongside of you, maybe give you some new tools, help you shape some of the tools that you already have, and guide you to becoming a more confident, clear, and captivating communicator. Just head to speakwithpeople.com/coaching for all the details, and we would love to talk to you. Well, today I'm so excited about this podcast on the Speak with People podcast. We are kind of diving into the question, how can I be happy? Is happiness even possible? What exactly is happiness? Is this just kind of like a fairy tale? In this episode, we're going to discover how mindfulness can become a powerful tool for unlocking beautiful things of life like joy and gratitude and contentment. And we're so excited that we are joined by an incredible guest who is going to guide us through some wisdom, some of her thoughts and exercises and techniques that's maybe going to shift your perspective, kind of reprioritize kind of different parts of your life, and then you can communicate in a different way. And my hope is we're going to explore happiness-based mindfulness, and you're going to figure out how this is just going to improve your leadership, your life, and your communication. Well, our guest today is just an incredible leader, Dr. Sara Spowart. She's a therapist. She's an adjunct professor. She's an author. And if I read through all of her degrees, you would love it, which I loved kind of going through each of them. It was just fantastic. We'll talk about that more in a second. But Sara, welcome to the Speak with People podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, hey, just to kind of give our audience, our listeners, a little bit more behind your story, could you just walk us through that? Tell us a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I am a little unusual.
I love it.
Yeah, I grew up in Monterey, California, and I went to school for my first degree, University, California, Santa Barbara, and I also lived in San Francisco a little bit. But my background is, since I can remember, I think probably since I was 4 or 5, I started to notice that people didn't seem that happy. I know that might sound strange, but I was a very sensitive kid. I used to cry a lot. I think I cried every day just because I was so sensitive about everything. But I just noticed so much unhappiness in general, everywhere we go, and I also noticed people would tell me stuff. Like, even when I was young, and I have a little clipboard out and I write notes and I try to give people advice even when I was like 7. And I don't know why people would talk to me, but they did. I guess I thought I could help kids and adults. But and usually I did have some kind of response to give. But anyways, so I remember I started becoming aware of all the suffering in the world. I think when I was like 7 or 8, my mom was telling me about the World Vision Sponsor a Child thing. And I was like, we got to do that. So I made her sponsor like 3 kids. And I started learning about like all the hunger in the world and all the issues, and it was really bothering me. Um, yes, I was a child, but it did bother me. And even in high school, I organized this thing. It was called the 30-hour famine, where you do 30 hours of fasting, and then you raise money through that. And we raised, I can't remember how much altogether over 4 years, but tens of thousands of dollars, I
Hmm.
know. And I thought, okay, this is the way to help, is, and for everyone to be happy, is if everyone had enough food,
Mm.
if everyone had enough, we'd all be okay. And then I learned that's not true. I learned, it was actually in my PhD program, my first PhD. I learned, because for some reason I thought, wow, the people that have PhDs, they must just be so happy. They must just really have figured everything out. I mean, it was
Right.
delusional thinking. But I remember looking around and being like, oh my gosh, this is like when I was little, and I could feel everyone being so unhappy around me. I could feel the unhappiness. And
Mm.
so I originally went into the first doctorate, focused on hunger and child malnutrition, and then in developing countries, and I switched to mindfulness and to looking at public health, as a mechanism of improving mindfulness to improve happiness. And I started really diving into this idea of, why are people so unhappy? Why are these people that have everything so unhappy? And then I was reflecting on it in general, thinking, wow, well, this is a problem that's being ignored.
Mm.
And be, yeah, it was also right before the PhD. I had done this project. I've also worked in other countries. And one of the projects I worked on was with Freedom from Hunger, was the organization. And I did a focus group. It was one of the things I did, but it was a focus group with these women in Mali for this program to help them. They were really impoverished, really bad off.
Mm.
Um, help them start their own businesses, and so that they could have a better life and help their communities and families. I remember in this focus group, it was really strange because I thought we were going to be talking about hunger and money and that. They were talking about happiness and
Mm.
on their own. And they were telling me, the people that eat 3 times a day and they eat vegetables and meat every day and rice, they're the happy ones. And the people that eat, 2 times a day, and they don't really have meat, they're less happy. And us, we only eat once a day, and we eat, you know, millet and grains, and we don't have enough food, so we're unhappy. And I remember thinking, huh, I know a lot of people that eat meat and have vegetables and rice, and they eat 3 times a day, and they're way more miserable than these people.
Right.
So I was thinking something's going on here that is worth looking at. And yeah, so it's a long story, but essentially that was sort of the major beginning of my obsession with this, and the things that I kind
Wow.
of figured out.
Wow. Wow, that's absolutely incredible. And it's not often that I interview people who say, and I'm not saying this to embarrass you. I just think it's incredible. When I worked on my first PhD, I I absolutely love that. I love that you are passionate about that, and you've gone after it. That's just incredible.
Yeah, well, I, I get very. It matters to me. It really matters to me how, I can't fix the world or anything like that, but all the pain there is. And so I just feel
Yes.
like there's still so much we don't know. And really, by the end of the first PhD, really what I learned was how much we don't know. And
Mm.
that was an interesting experience. Other people, maybe their takeaway was different, but it was really the beginning of me understanding, wow, the more you learn, there, the more there is to learn. So,
Yes. And it's just so true. I'm sitting here, in 2023, and we have internet, and we have air conditioning, and we have TVs in multiple rooms, and yet we can still find reasons to not be happy, to not be content, to be worried about other things. And I've had some of those moments, probably like you have, where I've been on trips in other parts of the world, in third world countries, and you start. Last year, I spent 10 or so days in the DR, and I mean, it's just amazing. By the end of the trip, you're like, oh, that's right. I'm going to go home to warm, hot showers. Like I haven't had a hot shower in, forever. And so it's just, that's how you look at things is so important. So that's why I'm so excited to dive into this and hear so much of your research and journey, because it's just so valuable. So it sounds like some of those early childhood memories and some of those trips maybe is kind of what started this journey for you. Is there anything along the way that you discovered that you went, okay, I've got to really dive into this research to help people, with mindfulness and happiness?
Yeah, well, not to go into too much, but my family, there's been also a lot of addiction issues.
Mm,
And that one person in particular I've been very close to, it practically, I don't say ruined me, but almost broke me. I was so, around the same time as a PhD when I decided to change. It really broke my heart, the whole thing. And I just was
mm,
like, well, how does this happen? And our epidemic in our country of the addiction stuff, which has really gotten so bad, and people just using pills and substances and anything they can, always on the outside. And also, the other thing I've seen is the self hatred in our society
ooh,
that I didn't encounter in other countries to the same level is so toxic. It's just so awful. And I see it with so many clients. And if there's one thing I could cure for people, it would be to start loving themselves and to understand that their self-hatred, their self-criticism, their self, the comparing, thinking they're failing, it's a program they learned from our society. It's not a real thing. And it's a fantastic way to push everyone to buy,
yep,
and to feel constantly inadequate, constantly bad. And there's really not a push that I've been seeing so far, although maybe that will change, to really be your authentic self, to be you, that you are beautiful as you are. And
mm,
what does that even mean? A lot of people have
yeah,
no idea what that means. I find that when I talk to people about self love, they have no idea what I'm talking about. But if I say, okay, well, think about something bad about yourself, that's easy.
right,
Think about think
huh,
about how to love yourself more. They're like, what does that mean? And this comparison situation we have, is really breeding ground actually for narcissism, personality
wow,
disorders, addiction, shame. What it does is it increases people's shame, and that increases their destructive behaviors. And then they want more things to feel better, and it keeps you chasing on the
wow,
outside
wow,
without turning towards within and being like, what is going on here? And we're
wow,
exposed to, I can't remember the number, but I know it's like an obscene amount of advertisements every day in our country.
right,
We don't even know it. It's very subconscious. It's almost like we're being, I don't say hypnotized, but we're being
yeah,
affected unconsciously by a lot of messaging.
wow,
This isn't good enough. Buy this. This isn't good enough. You need to do this.
right,
And that's why, even with my degrees, I do them for me because I feel this calling towards it. And I love it. But it's not for everyone. The way that school is set up now is really not for everyone. And there's certain things that I am definitely deficient in. So, we have our strengths and weaknesses,
yeah.
and we're all unique. And anyways, I feel like I'm going off here.
So yeah, to go back for a second, do you think that uh, specifically Americans struggle with this self hate so much more than some other countries because maybe we are exposed, to more technology or more things, or or is it in the more technology based countries because we have all this exposure to it, the self hate. We're not, we're comparing ourselves all the time. It just starts to ramp more and more up.
Yeah. So I think both. I think it's a bit of our culture. And I say this with love. I love my country, but we we have a lot of sickness, like mental
Mm.
mental sickness with the
Yes.
programming.
Yeah.
Um, I know we feel that we're special, we're a superpower. America's great, but then we also feel like we have to be striving and we have to prove we're great. We have to prove we're
Right.
special. Um, so we have that inherent within us, I think, that's sort of underlying in our culture. But then you add on top of it the fact that it's fairly capitalistic, which there's good and bad to that. Everything is a
Right.
mix of good and bad. But the way it seems to be designed is when we feel bad about ourselves, profits go up because then we want to buy stuff to fill the void, to fill the, I think some of the biggest things I come across is people feeling empty, there's a void, there's something missing, they feel lonely, they're disconnected. I'll go buy something. I'll go do something. I'll go spend money on something, or I'll go make something about myself better, like how I look with, whatever injections. Um, as opposed to just looking at, why do I feel empty? Why do I feel disconnected?
Yeah.
Where is this coming from?
Yeah.
So and actually there's I encourage everyone to look at the World Happiness Reports. There's it's really cool. There's something on there about I think it's 2018 edition, American unhappiness. But we are actually experiencing, according to this report and what I've seen, a social deterioration that is hurting our
Wow.
society,
Wow.
of loneliness and these other kinds of things.
Wow. So when it comes to being happy, like the question, how can I be happy? Like, is this like a good starting point, for seeking some of this kind of happiness based mindfulness? Because sometimes people, like, I can already hear like my grandma's voice going, you don't need to be happy. You don't need to be happy. But like, is this a good place to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my grandma, one of them, she was German, and she was a tough lady, and
Yes.
happiness was not a thing. Happiness was not a thing. No, she used to say, you got to beat him to the draw. Like, you gotta get there first. You got to take
Yes.
it and get it. So yeah, this idea is very counter to past things, and you could say it's a luxury, but I don't think it's a luxury. I actually think it needs to be more incorporated, because when you're happier, you function at a way higher level.
Mm.
Um, with school, for example, I just know for me, the more I worked on my happiness and my mindfulness, the easier it becomes with school. I learn much easier. When
Yep.
you're afraid, when you're stressed, you shut down, you close off, you can't remember,
Yep.
you get distracted. When you're happy, you perform better with work. You you can give more. You're nicer. It improves everything. So what does this mean? How do you get there? It's for better or worse, it depends on where the person's at. So first we have to kind of figure out the person's individual level of happiness. Unfortunately, by the time people come to therapy, they're usually extremely depressed or even suicidally depressed. It's like it's like not going to the dentist for 20 years or 30 years.
Right.
It's been neglected this whole time, or the tools they've been using haven't been the right tools. So you have to meet people with where they're at is number one. The first step to that, though, is people even knowing where they're at, which you'd be surprised how many people are in denial about their situation.
Yeah.
And they just think, well, but if I just get this, then that will
Right.
fix it. It's like, yeah, but you've been doing this for 40 or 50 years and you still haven't got there. Like, what about just stopping and
Right.
addressing it? So I say number one is noticing where you're at,
Yeah.
acknowledging what is going on with you. Second, and this is, so I made this program. It's called Happiness Based Mindfulness Program. I'm going to be launching the first preliminary draft of it, hopefully this week. But anyways, the first part of that is called Trapped in Loops and Cycles. And it's about trying to understand where you're stuck, where you feel trapped, where you're kind of in a loop or a cycle, a pattern that you don't seem to be able to get out of in your life. And the important thing with that is people tend to be cyclical. If you don't become aware of your patterns and cycles, you're kind of doomed to keep being stuck in them.
Right.
And this is a hard one because it also takes a little bit of accountability. It takes a little bit of acknowledgement that your way of doing things maybe hasn't been working. And in some religions, actually, I know there's beliefs that hell is not fire brimstone, it's being stuck, being trapped.
Mm.
So that's the first part.
Wow.
Yeah. And then from there, working to see patterns, working to figure out your beliefs, and living more authentically are components of it.
Wow.
But happiness is relative,
Yeah.
is another part of this.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, no, it's so good. I was just thinking like that's so true because we get so trapped in those same cycles and we wake up and it is 20, 30 years, later and we're like, well, it's never going to change. I can't I ever change it. So having the courage and the strength to go, okay, I've got to recognize what is, I mean, that's so important. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. People feel if they acknowledge it. Although I find that
Right.
when people are so overwhelmed, they won't even acknowledge. They will be more quick to blame and say, well, it's this person's fault, or this is the reason, this is it. Because they're so up, it's so painful to be like, oh
Yep.
my gosh, this has been going on my whole life.
Yep.
So it takes a lot of courage to admit, yep, this is a problem. I need to change.
Yep.
That's number one, is it takes
Yeah.
courage. And our brains are actually wired for survival, which largely means doing what's familiar,
Mm.
not so much for being happy. So we're
Yeah.
actually kind of going against our biology, you could argue. So
Ah.
change, yeah. So change, I find, is most likely to happen when we can be very gentle with ourselves and go very slow. Some people are so ready for change, they make these big bold things really quick. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And they said, yeah, but I've been needing to do this for 20 years. So they're
Right.
they're ready. But a lot of people, though, we have to do kind of like baby steps. Like,
Yeah.
okay, today, what can you do? Like, let's say they struggle with, I don't know, being very unhappy about their physical health. We look at baby steps every day. It's like a massive, huge ship, and we're just like, we got to
Mm.
change the course a little bit. So we look at small baby steps of how to change, and part of it's taking responsibility. And responsible doesn't mean it's your fault you're unhappy. It
Right.
means, okay, what do I need to take responsibility for in my life that I can work on about my inner emotional state?
Mm.
Um, and the other thing that I made, which seems to really help people. It's so basic too, but I'm like, wow, this is great. I made this. So I'm like, it's simple, but it works. I made this chart. It has 3 levels to it. The bottom level is I called it the red zone. It's color red, and it's labeled destructive emotions, and it's all those painful, bad
Mm.
emotions that we get trapped in. And then the second level is, or the second part is, I call the green zone, and I call it the relief zone. And those are emotions that they're not like, you're not flying high, but you're feeling relief from the pain. You're
Yeah.
feeling neutral or more positive, and you're more empowered. You're feeling stronger. And then the top part is the blue zone, and I call those the uplifting and lightening emotions. Those are things like, by the way, some people tell me they've never experienced, like joy, compassion,
Right.
empathy, peace. And you'd be surprised how many people, they don't know what that means. Not really.
Wow.
And so we work from that. And I've seen, just by noticing where you are in the scale every day, it starts to shift it.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, just even putting that focus into it or just that a little bit of investment. It's something because people,
Hmm.
I imagine, and I know this to be true in my life, I get to that where the pain has just pounded and pounded on. Even those tiny little changes, I'm like, it won't do anything, so why keep going? But as you were talking about this, and this is so helpful, I was just thinking to me, about how so many folks, it's like we help push each other down. I can't remember the old illustration about putting what type of animal in a bucket, but they don't help each other out. They just kind of help pulling each other down, and we do that all the time. I think we're in a deficit with encouragement in our world. And why is it that, so often our thought is like, well, that could be better, or that, instead of just encouraging somebody, helping them get in that blue zone would be so important.
It would be. And there's yeah, different reasons for that. And you're right. It's a problem. It is partly a cultural thing.
Hmm.
And it's a misunderstanding of what it takes to be successful. And quite honestly, it's actually a little bit characteristic of some narcissism.
Hmm.
So, if a couple of things, if you have, let's say, a bit of an ego, you're a bit focused on yourself, and then you also don't feel very good about yourself for whatever reason, and sometimes people's reasons for not feeling good about themselves don't really make any sense. They're not even good reasons. It's
Right.
just they don't feel good.
Right.
If you see someone else that you think is higher than you, well, if you don't feel like you have the ability to get higher, then you bring them down. That makes you feel better,
Right.
which is a type of abuse, actually. And it's not going to help you feel good about yourself either. If you're abusing people, bringing them down because you don't feel strong enough to pull yourself up, well, that's only going to add to your shame, add to your low self-esteem, because on some level, you're hurting someone else. And the reason it's also bad is it hurts the whole system. So we are actually all, even though we can't see it, even though we're separate bodies, we're all interconnected. So what we do, like people like to think, especially in our society, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. Like I did it all on my own. It's like, well, just to do this podcast right now, if you have to think about all the people we've relied on to get here, I don't even know how many we'd be looking at,
Right.
between the internet, electricity, making clothes, my education. I mean, all of it, we're all very interconnected. And
Yeah.
so we actually feel better about ourselves when we can be good and kind to others. Even it actually builds our self-esteem. So
Yeah.
if you do things like volunteering, if you can give back, even if you feel threatened by someone, if you can try to be nice to them, it builds
Yes.
your self-esteem up. And a better approach I found is ask the person, how did you
Yes.
get where, how did you get this way? What did you do?
Yes.
Learn. Open your mind to be humble enough to learn.
Wow, that's so good. And these things will, I mean, help reduce stress, you know, boost our resilience, and it really will contribute to our overall well-being. And it's just so important for us to take those steps forward. What advice would you give, the person that's like, okay, I need to start moving forward with this stuff? What could they do today to take those steps towards mindfulness?
Yeah, so I would say, I think the stuff I came up with would be helpful, but just you doing
Yes.
it on your own, I would track it. Start tracking how
Mm.
happy you are every day. It sounds so simple, but honestly, a lot of stuff that works is really simple. I would say every day from 1 to 10, 10 being the most happy, 1 being the least, track how happy you are.
Mm.
Try to be honest with yourself though, because
Yeah.
it's not always easy to be honest. Um, And if you can't be honest about that, you can ask yourself how unhappy you are from 1 to 10, 10
Right.
being the most, 1 being the least. Um, so something in our society that's interesting is this idea that we have to do actions to make changes. But actually, if we think of all of this as like a pattern, a habit, an energy, momentum, by noticing, you're shifting the momentum, you're slowing the pattern down.
Mm.
So it actually changes it just by being a detached observer and noticing.
Yeah.
Um, so that's what I would say is start by tracking every day, non-judgmentally with kindness and love for yourself if you can, or compassion. Just track every day.
Yeah. Boy, that's good. Boy, that's good. So helpful. And we could I feel like we've scratched the surface, and I can already see, what the second podcast will be, the when we have you back, cuz this is so powerful. Let's do this, because we kind of keep it to a certain amount of time, and you've already given us so much to think about. Uh, uh, why don't we move on to kind of getting to know you more as, who you are. And so we do this, each week with our guests. And so I ask you some rapid fire questions. And so our listeners can kind of keep getting to know you. But
Okay.
we talk about speaking a lot on this podcast, communicating. Do you have a favorite communicator, whether a speaker or an artist or someone that you're like, oh, I could listen to them forever?
It's a good question. I like Eckhart Tolle. I don't know if I like him because I feel like he communicates with his presence. And so just listening to him, it kind of slows you down and it helps you to reflect. So I would say someone like Eckhart Tolle.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so you spent a considerable amount of your life in California. Do you have a favorite spot that you lived or a favorite spot that you went to just, oh, this place just inspires me. I just love it.
Yeah, actually. Because I went to college for my undergrad at University of California, Santa Barbara, which I loved. It was so fantastic. I did the global studies program there. Like 45 minutes south of there is a place called Summerland. I like that place. It's really cool because you're away from the feeling of any crowdedness, and it's small and peaceful, and there's the beach, and there's some cool coffee shops, and you can walk around.
Nice.
So yeah, I'd say Summerland I really liked.
Okay, last question. Is there a book that you would recommend either on this topic or, one that would just really breathe life into our listeners?
Yeah, that is a good question. I'm tempted to mention my book. I published a book recently. I would say, let me think about this. Yes. There's a book called Mindful Self-Compassion. I like that a lot. I'm trying to remember the author. She's so good. Kristen Neff. Mindful Self-Compassion. And then I wrote a book that I published called You Are Love.
You Are Love. I love it. Well, what I love to do is we love to go and I'll grab a couple of copies of it. And we have a Facebook community group for the different, folks, leaders who are part of the Speak With Me community. So we'll do some giveaways inside of that with your book because we'd love to promote it as much as we can. Because even from the podcast today, I can't wait to order it and get it so I can start to go through it. Before I let you go, where can we point our listeners to find you online and all that information?
Yeah, my website, www.drsaraspowart.com, and I'm in the process of launching the Happiness Learned website, and that will be ready later in October.
Awesome. Well, we'll put that in our Facebook group and on the podcast and the show notes and all that kind of stuff. I just can't thank you enough for pouring out your wisdom, for being so vulnerable and sharing such great insights with us. Just thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
Absolutely. And thank you to all of our listeners. We so appreciate you being a part of the Speak With People podcast week in, week out. Just to remember, one of the best things you can do to show support for the Speak With People podcast is to give us a like, share it, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Those kind of things are just incredible. Again, hopefully you've been challenged, encouraged to elevate the practice and the importance of healthy communication in your life. My hope is that today's podcast will encourage you to speak with people and not at them. Thank you again for listening today and can't wait to be with you